Joined at this moment by Michael Herron, Professor at Dartmouth College. Appreciate your joining us, Professor Herron. Is this a done deal, or are pollsters wary because of what happened 4 years ago? Do you see a clear direction emerging against the president at the moment?
You know, I don't think it's a done deal. There are too many things up in the air. I mean, there's the issue that you mentioned, that people are wary of polls since what happened in 2016. And in addition, it's such an unprecedented election, given that the country is voting in a pandemic. I think your previous guest mentioned there have been millions of people who voted by mail and early. Some states in the country have had more early votes this election already than their entire turnout in 2016. So all those factors make it really hard to know, like the total turnout at the end of the evening and where things are going to go.
But am I right, Professor Herron, that for Donald Trump to win, he needs a near miracle, doesn't he? He needs to win or retain all the states that he won, the battleground states that he won in 2016, in most of which he's trailing. And would lose a couple of states which of those, and that would be the end of the road. So he needs to win the Floridas, the Arizonas, the Pennsylvanias, the Michigans, the Wisconsins. Not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk about what is or is not a miracle here, but yes, for Trump to win, the president to win, he needs to do what you described. Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. Everyone can read the polls. The question is, should we be confident in the polls given the surge in turnout that we've already seen in the election, and just the generic, the country doesn't have a lot of history, like no one really does, about voting in pandemics and what that might do. But yes, you're right. The polls are not favorable to the president right now.
I want to ask all of you, and then I'll come to to get the Indian perspective. But just to push the point, what is at stake in this election? Is this election, Colleen Bauman, as some people say, about the soul of America? Is this a battle for the soul of America?
That's a great question. Obviously, there are different opinions on this. I would say that, this election really reflects, in some ways, a battle about what democracy means. I mean, there's been a lot of debate, as you know, from watching the United States, about like the right to vote. And obviously, the country has struggled with voting rights throughout its history. But we're really seeing an incredible push, in both directions. Some people trying to make voting easier. Some people, in the name of like voter integrity or election integrity, basically raising barriers. So from my perspective, someone who studies elections, what I see is like this election is, to a large extent, about is like what does the right to vote mean? Do we want to make it so that everyone can cast a vote fairly and easily, or not?
Interesting. Colleen Bauman, if you can hear me, do you believe that this is an election, as I called it, for the soul of America?
I think all of our elections are important. This will be the 59th time that Americans have gone to the polls freely. And I think that Americans are always thinking about the future of their country when they go to the voting booth. And this morning when I went to vote, as I usually do at my local school, everything was stable, everything was quiet. People were saying hello to the people at the Trump table and saying hello to the people at the Biden table. I think people love this civic exercise, and they're extremely enthusiastic about it this time, which may reflect the high stakes that many people believe that this election has. Again, two very different candidates at a very difficult time in American history, so I think this election is especially important. I'm not so sure I'd call it an election for the soul of America, but it is an extremely important election in our history.
Michael Kugelman, how do you see this election? What's at stake in this election for America?
I see this election as a referendum on the phenomenon of Donald Trump, someone who has been such a different type of president to what this country has been used to. Some, his supporters, find it to be a breath of fresh air. His critics find it abhorrent. And obviously, this is someone who has passed a number of controversial policies, and the way that he looks at the office of the presidency is so different from what Americans have been used to. His ideas on the role of U.S. leadership in the world is very, very different from past presidents. So I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, the election is a referendum on many things, but above all, it is a referendum on Donald Trump himself, and if this is the type of president that America would be willing to see return for power, someone that is probably, I would argue, one of the most unconventional presidents that this country has ever had. for sure.
Professor Herron, these fears being expressed that this election could lead to violence, it could lead to even more polarization in society. Do you go along with that, or do you believe an election sometimes provides a healing touch?
That's a really good question. Everyone really hopes that we'll end up in a more civil period in the country after this election. Could it be a healing touch, as you say? I think we can all envision scenarios in which it is. I think a lot will depend on sort of what happens in the next few days. The possible scenarios that people are speculating about in say today and tomorrow and Thursday, it's really broad. Some people think it might be a very decisive victory for Joe Biden. Some people think it might be very vitriolic and contested in multiple states. And if I had to speculate, the degree of rancor in the next couple of days will really have an effect on sort of how we come out of this. And I think most people are hoping it doesn't turn out into a huge like month-long fight that ends up in the courts. But that remains to be determined. So.